The stones are older than the written word. Stonehenge stands on Salisbury Plain in the county of Wiltshire in southern England, a ring of standing stones arranged with a precision that took generations to achieve, aligned to the rising sun of the midsummer solstice and the setting sun of the midwinter solstice in a way that speaks to a sustained and careful observation of the sky. The monument has been standing, in some form, for roughly 5,000 years, which means it was already ancient when the Roman legions marched past it, already ancient when the first documents in the English language were written, already ancient when the Norman conquest transformed the culture of the island on which it stands. The specific civilization that built it has no name that history records. Its builders left no writing, no identifiable language, no accounts of their own purposes or their own beliefs. What they left is the stone. The stones are the evidence, and the stones raise more questions than they answer. The largest of them, the sarsen stones that form the outer circle and the inner horseshoe arrangement, weigh between 20 and 25 tons and were transported from a quarry site at Marlborough Downs, approximately 25 kilometers to the north. The smaller blue stones, which form the inner arrangements, were transported from the Preseli Hills in Wales, a distance of approximately 250 kilometers by the most direct route, and considerably further by the routes that the available transport technology of the Neolithic period would have required. The engineering of moving these stones, and the organizational capacity of the communities that accomplished it, is among the more remarkable achievements in the prehistory of the British Isles. The landscape around Stonehenge is as important as the monument itself. Salisbury Plain is dotted with hundreds of Neolithic and Bronze Age monuments, burial mounds, earthwork enclosures, avenues, and smaller stone and timber circles that together constitute one of the densest concentrations of prehistoric ceremonial monuments anywhere in the world. Stonehenge was not built in isolation. It was built as part of a ritual landscape that was developed and modified across more than 2,000 years of sustained community investment, and understanding the monument requires understanding the broader landscape in which it sits. Tonight we go to Salisbury Plain. We walk the avenues and the earthworks and the burial mounds that surround the Great Stone Circle. We follow the evidence of the archaeology into the lives of the people who built Stonehenge and who were buried in its shadow. And we ask what they were trying to do, and whether the stones themselves contain the answer. The answer, as the scholarship has established across 2 centuries of investigation, is partial, specific, and genuinely surprising. The specific things that the evidence can say about Stonehenge and its builders have changed substantially in the past 2 decades, and the picture that is emerging is more complex, more human, and in some respects more moving than the earlier accounts of the monument could convey. Stonehenge occupies a specific position in the popular understanding of prehistoric Britain that is both revealing and potentially misleading. The monument is among the most recognized prehistoric sites in the world, and its silhouette against the sky of Salisbury Plain has become one of the more immediately recognizable images in the visual vocabulary of the ancient world. The specific popular fascination with Stonehenge reflects something genuine about the monument. Its combination of visible physical achievement and deep interpretive mystery gives it a quality that other prehistoric sites, even ones of comparable scale, rarely match. The stones are there, undeniably and impressively. What they mean is uncertain, and the specific character of the uncertainty, which invites speculation without allowing it to be definitively resolved, is part of what makes the monument so persistently compelling. And its silhouette against the sky of Salisbury Plain has become one of the more immediately recognizable images in the visual vocabulary of the ancient world. But the specific familiarity of the image of Stonehenge, the circle of great stones standing on the open plain, can obscure the specific complexity of what the monument actually is and what it represents in the longer story of prehistoric Britain. Stonehenge is not a single monument built in a single moment by a single community. It is the end result of a process of construction and modification that unfolded across approximately 1,500 years, beginning around 3000 BCE and continuing through successive phases of building and rebuilding that transformed the site from a simple circular earthwork to the elaborate stone arrangement that stands today. The specific sequence of these building phases, established by decades of excavation and by the application of increasingly precise radiocarbon dating to the materials associated with each phase, gives a picture of the monument's development that is considerably more complex and more interesting than the common image of a single-planned construction would suggest. The people who built Stonehenge were not a single people in any simple sense. The communities that first dug the circular ditch and bank of the earliest monument around 3000 BCE were probably not the same communities that erected the Great Sarsen stones around 2500 BCE, and those communities were themselves different from the earlier ones in their material culture, their genetic composition, and their specific cultural traditions. The history of Stonehenge is therefore partly a history of the successive communities that inhabited southern Britain across a long period of cultural change, and understanding the monument requires understanding the specific character of each of those communities and the specific purposes that each brought to the site. The specific question of why Stonehenge was built, and what purpose it served for the communities that invested so heavily in its construction and modification across so many centuries, is the central question of Stonehenge archaeology, and it is one that the evidence addresses in interesting and incomplete ways. The solar alignments of the monument speak to an astronomical purpose of some kind. The human remains found at the site and in the surrounding landscape speak to a funerary and memorial function. The specific spatial organization of the monument, with its carefully managed sight lines and its specific proportions, speaks to a tradition of architectural and ritual knowledge of considerable sophistication. But the specific theological content of the beliefs that motivated the construction, and the specific social and political mechanisms through which the construction was organized and funded, remain genuinely uncertain. The landscape of Salisbury Plain, in which Stonehenge is embedded, is the starting point for understanding the monument and the civilization that produced it. Salisbury Plain is a chalk plateau in southern England, its surface shaped by the dissolution of the chalk bedrock and by the specific patterns of drainage that chalk geology produces. The plain is largely treeless and open, its wide horizon giving it a quality of exposure and visibility that distinguishes it from most of the other landscapes of southern Britain. The specific visual character of Salisbury Plain as a landscape is part of the experience of Stonehenge in a way that cannot be separated from the experience of the monument itself. The openness of the plain, the wide sky, the visibility of the horizon in every direction, all contribute to the sense of the monument as a marker in a landscape rather than as an isolated construction, and the specific relationship between the monument and the horizon against which it is seen from different angles and at different times of day is part of what the monument was designed to produce. Its surface shaped by the dissolution of the chalk bedrock and by the specific patterns of drainage that chalk geology produces. In the period when Stonehenge was being built, the plain was not the grassland of modern times. It was a more wooded landscape, gradually being opened by the forest clearance that early Neolithic farmers had been practicing across Britain for centuries before the first monument was raised. The specific character of the chalk geology is relevant to the specific character of the archaeology. Chalk preserves bone and organic material better than most British soils, and the burial mounds and the earthwork monuments of Salisbury Plain have produced an unusually rich record of human skeletal remains, animal bones, and other organic materials that give a relatively detailed picture of the biological and material life of the monument builders. The specific combination of the good preservation conditions and the density of monuments has made Salisbury Plain one of the most intensively studied prehistoric landscapes in the world. The rivers that drain the chalk plain, including the Avon and the Till and the Wylye, were significant features of the prehistoric landscape, serving as routes of movement and as sources of the fresh water that the communities of the plain required. The specific route of the River Avon, which runs approximately 3 kilometers to the east of Stonehenge, has been identified as particularly significant for the prehistoric use of the landscape, and the excavation of the Stonehenge Avenue, the formal earthwork corridor that connects Stonehenge to the river. has given researchers evidence for the specific role of the river in the ritual geography of the ancient site. The concentration of prehistoric monuments on Salisbury Plain is extraordinary even by the standards of prehistoric Britain, which is itself one of the more monument-rich prehistoric landscapes in the world. The larger monuments of the region, including the massive earthwork enclosure of Dowington Walls, the long barrows of the Vale of Pewsey, the Cursus Monument north of Stonehenge, and the various stone and timber circles of the surrounding area, together constitute a landscape that was systematically modified by the communities of the Neolithic and early Bronze Age over a period of more than 2,000 years. And the specific spatial relationships between these monuments and Stonehenge are one of the more productive areas of current research. The construction sequence of Stonehenge, as it is currently understood from the accumulated evidence of more than a century of excavation and survey, divides the monument's history into a series of distinct phases. The earliest phase, conventionally dated to approximately 3000 BCE, was the creation of the circular ditch and bank that defined the outer boundary of the monument site. This earthwork enclosure, with its entrance causeway facing toward the northeast, is not a defensive structure but a ceremonial boundary, defining the space of the monument and separating it from the surrounding landscape. The specific decision to orient the entrance of the earliest monument toward the northeast, toward the rising sun of the midsummer solstice, is one of the earliest pieces of evidence for the astronomical orientation that would become increasingly precise across the subsequent building phases. The consistency of this orientation through 1,500 years of monument modification speaks to a tradition of astronomical attention that was established in the earliest phases of the site's use and maintained across all subsequent phases. Was the creation of the circular ditch and bank that defined the outer boundary of the monument site. The circular form of the enclosure, approximately 100 meters in diameter, became the spatial framework within which all subsequent phases of construction were carried out. In this early phase, the site was apparently used primarily as a cremation cemetery. More than 50 individuals have been identified from the cremated bone deposits recovered from within the enclosure, and the specific distribution of these deposits suggests that the earliest Stonehenge was as much a place of the dead as a place of astronomical alignment. The specific character of the cremation cemetery and the specific individuals who were buried there are one of the more productive areas of current research, using the genetic and isotopic analysis of the cremated bone to reconstruct the geographic origins and the biological relationships of the people buried at the site. The second major phase of construction, around 2500 BCE, was the erection of the Great Sarsen Stones. This phase involved the transport of the massive sarsen blocks from Marlborough Downs, their preparation at the site by the specific techniques of pounding and grinding that the stoneworkers used to shape the raw blocks into the required forms, and their erection in the specific arrangement of the outer circle and the inner trilithon horseshoe that constitutes the most recognizable form of the monument today. The specific engineering of erecting stones weighing 25 tons without mechanical advantage, using the specific timber and rope and earthen ramp technology available in the 3rd millennium BCE, is one of the more intensively studied aspects of the monument's construction history. The bluestones, the smaller igneous stones transported from Wales, were introduced to the site in a series of phases beginning around 2500 BCE and continuing through subsequent modifications that rearranged them several times before they reached their current positions in the inner oval and the inner circle of the monument. The specific sequence of bluestone arrangements, and the specific reasons why the stones were moved and rearranged multiple times across the monument's history, are questions that the archaeology has partially addressed but not completely resolved. The question of how the sarsen stones were transported from Marlborough Downs to Stonehenge, a distance of approximately 25 kilometers, has been one of the more actively researched questions in the study of the monument. The specific technology available to the Neolithic builders of Stonehenge did not include wheeled vehicles, metal tools, or any of the mechanical advantage systems of later periods. The transport of the massive sarsen blocks, the heaviest of which weigh approximately 25 tons, therefore had to be accomplished using human labor, wooden sledges, rollers or rails, ropes made from plant fibers, and the specific knowledge of how to organize large numbers of people to work effectively as a coordinated force. The specific intellectual challenge of this transportation, and the specific social challenge of organizing the labor required, are as impressive in their own way as the physical result. The people who planned the Stonehenge construction were solving real engineering and organizational problems with the specific tools and social structures available to them, and the solutions they arrived at worked, which is the most direct evidence available for the sophistication of their practical intelligence. Metal tools, or any of the mechanical advantage systems of later periods. Experimental archaeology projects that have attempted to replicate aspects of the transportation process, using materials and methods consistent with what was available to the Neolithic builders, have shown that the task was achievable with sufficient labor but required a degree of social organization and planning that speaks to communities with considerable capacity for collective action. The specific route by which the sarsen stones were transported has been the subject of considerable research and debate. The most direct overland route from the Marlborough Downs quarries to Stonehenge would have crossed several river valleys and areas of woodland, and the specific logistics of moving 25-ton stones across varied terrain using non-mechanized methods is one that the experimental and theoretical work has not fully resolved. The possibility that sections of the route used river transport, floating the stones on rafts or barges along sections of the waterway network, has been proposed but has not been confirmed by direct evidence. The bluestones from the Press Ely Hills present an even more formidable transport challenge. The distance from the Press Ely Hills in southwest Wales to Stonehenge is approximately 250 kilometers by the most direct land route, and the specific methods by which stones weighing up to 2 tons were transported across this distance have been the subject of sustained experimental and theoretical investigation. The possibility that the bluestones were transported in part by sea, moved along the Welsh coast and then along the coast of the Bristol Channel before being hauled overland, is one of the routes that has been proposed and that experimental testing has suggested is feasible with the technology of the period. The question of why bluestones from Wales were used in the construction of Stonehenge at all, when locally available materials could have been used, is one that the research has addressed through the investigation of the specific geological and acoustic properties of the Welsh stones and through the archaeological investigation of the Press Ely Hills landscape. The evidence for significant monument construction and burial activity in the Press Ely Hills region in the period before the bluestones were transported to Wiltshire suggests that the stones may have carried a specific cultural significance related to their place of origin that made the effort of transporting them worthwhile. The solar alignments of Stonehenge are its most celebrated feature, and the specific astronomical orientations of the monument have attracted sustained attention from both researchers and the general public. The most precisely documented alignment is the relationship between the primary axis of the monument and the rising sun of the midsummer solstice. An observer standing at the center of the stone circle on the morning of the summer solstice sees the sun rise directly over the heel stone, a large unworked sarsen stone standing outside the northeast entrance of the monument. The specific experience of standing within the stone circle on the morning of the summer solstice, as the sun rises over the heel stone in the alignment that the monument was designed to produce, is one that many visitors have described in terms that go beyond simple appreciation of an astronomical fact. The specific combination of the scale of the stones, the precision of the alignment, and the quality of the light in those specific moments creates an experience of the monument that the visit at other times of year and in other conditions does not replicate. And the rising sun of the midsummer solstice. An observer standing at the center of the stone circle on the morning of the summer solstice sees the sun rise directly over the heel stone, a large unworked sarsen stone standing outside the northeast entrance of the monument, and the principal axis of the monument is aligned to this specific astronomical event with a precision that cannot be accidental. The corresponding alignment to the setting sun of the midwinter solstice from the northeast entrance, looking through the central trilithon toward the southwest horizon, is equally precise, and the two alignments together establish the primary astronomical orientation of the monument beyond any reasonable doubt. The specific meaning of these alignments, and what they tell us about the beliefs and the practices of the monument builders, is a question that the astronomical evidence raises without fully answering. The solstices are the extreme positions of the sun in its annual cycle, the moments when the sun reaches its furthest point north or south of the celestial equator and begins to return toward the other extreme. For agricultural communities, the solstices mark specific points in the annual cycle of seasonal change. The summer solstice as the peak of the year's light and warmth, and the winter solstice as the turning point from which the days would begin to lengthen. The specific significance that the monument builders attach to these moments is not directly recoverable from the material evidence alone. The hypothesis that Stonehenge was primarily a monument to the midwinter solstice rather than the midsummer one has been argued by some researchers on the basis that the primary axis of the monument, with the monument opening toward the northeast and the primary trilithon facing southwest, was designed primarily for an observer looking toward the southwest from the northeast entrance, which is the direction of the setting midwinter sun. This interpretation would place the midwinter solstice, with its specific cultural associations, as the moment of the return of the light and the beginning of the annual renewal of the world, at the center of the monument's ritual program. The presence of additional astronomical alignments in the monument, including possible alignments to the rising and setting positions of the moon at its major and minor standstills, has been proposed by researchers working in the field of archaeoastronomy, and the evidence for some of these additional alignments is suggestive, though the specific evidence for intentionality in each case is not as strong as the evidence for the primary solar alignments. The human remains associated with Stonehenge and its surrounding landscape give the most direct evidence for the specific people who built the monument and who used it across the centuries of its active life. The cremated bone deposits recovered from within the Stonehenge enclosure, representing more than 50 individuals buried at the site across the period from the earliest monument phase through the erection of the great stones, are the primary evidence for the funerary use of the site. The specific challenge of analyzing cremated bone using the scientific methods that have transformed the study of prehistoric individuals is considerable, because the cremation process destroys much of the DNA and alters many of the isotopic signatures that are used to reconstruct the geographic origins and the biological relationships of individuals. The development of new methods for extracting useful information from cremated bone and the application of these methods to the Stonehenge cremation deposits has been one of the more productive areas of current bioarchaeological research. Representing more than 50 individuals buried at the site across the period from the earliest monument phase through the erection of the great stones, are the primary evidence for the funerary use of the site. The specific analysis of these remains, using radiocarbon dating to establish the timing of individual burials and isotopic analysis to investigate the geographic origins of the individuals buried, has produced a picture of a burial population that included both local people and individuals from distant parts of Britain, and whose composition changed through time in ways that reflect the changing character of the communities using the site. The discovery that some of the earliest individuals buried at Stonehenge appear to have come from western Britain, including from the region of the Preseli Hills where the bluestones originated, has been one of the more striking results of the recent bioarchaeological work at the site. If this evidence is confirmed by further analysis, it suggests a connection between the communities of the Preseli Hills region and the early use of Stonehenge that predates the transport of the bluestones to Wiltshire, and it gives the choice of Welsh stones for the monument a specific human dimension that the purely logistical account of the transport cannot capture. The burial mounds of Salisbury Plain, which number in the hundreds in the landscape surrounding Stonehenge, are the primary evidence for the funerary traditions of the Bronze Age communities that used the monument area after the main phase of construction. The round barrows of the Stonehenge area, many of them clustered in cemeteries visible from the monument, contain the burials of individuals who were apparently placed in deliberate spatial relationship to the Great Stone Circle, and the specific wealth of the grave goods in some of these barrows speaks to individuals of considerable status who were buried with the specific material markers of social distinction that characterized the early Bronze Age elite. The skeletal material from the non-cremated burials of the region, Analyzed using the full range of modern bioarchaeological methods, including ancient DNA analysis and isotopic analysis, is giving increasingly detailed information about the genetic history and the mobility patterns of the monument builders and their descendants. The ancient DNA results have confirmed a major population replacement in Britain in the period around 2400 to 2000 BCE, when the genetic composition of the British population changed dramatically as incoming communities related to the continental bell beaker culture largely replaced the earlier Neolithic farming population. This genetic replacement occurred in the same period as the main phase of Stonehenge construction, and it raises fascinating questions about the cultural continuity or discontinuity between the builders of the first monuments and the builders of the great stone structure. The wider landscape of the Stonehenge World Heritage Site, which encompasses an area of approximately 26 square kilometers around the monument, is one of the richest prehistoric landscapes in the world and is essential context for understanding Stonehenge itself. The Cursus, a Neolithic earthwork monument consisting of two parallel ditches running east to west for approximately 3 kilometers across the plain north of Stonehenge, is one of the largest and most enigmatic features of the landscape. The Cursus predates the main stone phases of Stonehenge by several centuries, and its specific purpose has not been established with confidence. The specific investigation of the Cursus in recent years, using a combination of targeted excavation and geophysical survey, has produced evidence for the specific construction methods used to build it and for the specific character of the material deposited within and around it, but the interpretation of its purpose remains genuinely uncertain. The specific spatial relationship between the Cursus and the subsequent Stonehenge monuments, and the specific sightlines between them, are one of the areas where further research has the potential to shed light on the coherence of the broader ritual landscape. Running east to west for approximately 3 kilometers across the plain north of Stonehenge is one of the largest and most enigmatic features of the landscape. It may have been a processional route, a boundary marker, or a monument whose primary meaning was cosmological rather than functional in any practical sense. The specific spatial relationship between the Cursus and the later Stonehenge monuments is one that the research is continuing to investigate through the survey and excavation of the features of the broader landscape. Dynington Walls, located approximately 3 kilometers northeast of Stonehenge on the bank of the River Avon, is one of the largest Neolithic earthwork enclosures in Britain, enclosing an area of approximately 17 hectares. The interior of the enclosure contained 2 large timber circles, identified by the post holes remaining after the timber posts decayed, and the specific character of the material deposited in and around the enclosure, including enormous quantities of animal bone, pottery, and flint tools, speaks to major feasting and gathering events of considerable scale. The specific relationship between Dynington Walls and Stonehenge, which are connected by the River Avon and which appear to have been used simultaneously in the period around 2500 BCE, has been interpreted as a complementary pair of monuments, one associated with the living and the activities of the living community, the other associated with the dead and with the ceremonies that connected the living to the ancestors. The Stonehenge Avenue, the formal earthwork corridor that runs from the northeast entrance of Stonehenge toward the River Avon, is one of the most important features of the ritual landscape because it documents the specific route through which the monument was approached in its primary period of use. The avenue, approximately 3 kilometers long, follows a course that is aligned to the summer solstice sunrise and the winter solstice sunset, reinforcing the astronomical significance of the monument's primary axis and giving the approach to the monument a specific directional character that was presumably part of the ritual experience of those who used it. The long barrows of the Vale of Pewsey and the surrounding areas, which predate Stonehenge by many centuries and document the funerary traditions of the earliest Neolithic farmers in the region, are the starting point of the monument sequence that culminates in the Great Stone Circle. The specific monuments of this earlier tradition, including the West Kennet Long Barrow near Avebury and the various long barrows of the Salisbury Plain area, document a funerary tradition in which the communal burial of multiple individuals in a single elaborate monument over multiple generations was the characteristic expression of the relationship between the community and its ancestors. The social organization of the communities that built Stonehenge is one of the most actively debated questions in British prehistoric archaeology, and the specific evidence has generated a range of interpretations. The traditional interpretation of Stonehenge as the product of a stratified society with powerful chiefs or leaders who could command the labor of large numbers of people has been challenged by researchers who argue that the social organization of Neolithic Britain was more communal and less hierarchical than this model suggests. The specific tension between these two interpretive positions reflects a genuine uncertainty in the evidence rather than simply a difference of scholarly opinion. The material record of the Neolithic period in Britain is ambiguous in the specific ways that are most relevant to this debate, and the specific social mechanisms that produce the scale of collective action visible in the monument record are genuinely not determinable from the available evidence with confidence. With powerful chiefs or leaders who could command the labor of large numbers of people, and who were therefore comparable to the elite rulers of more complex societies in the ancient world, has been challenged by researchers who argue that the social organization of Neolithic Britain was more communal and less hierarchical than this model suggests. The specific evidence for the social structure of the Stonehenge builders comes primarily from the burial evidence, and the interpretation of that evidence is itself contested. The burial evidence from the period of the earliest Stonehenge, approximately 3000 to 2500 BCE, shows a pattern that is relatively undifferentiated in terms of the wealth of accompanying grave goods. The cremated individuals buried within the Stonehenge enclosure do not show the dramatic differential in burial wealth that characterizes the later Bronze Age burials of the region, and this relative equality in burial treatment has been interpreted by some researchers as evidence for a more communal and less hierarchical social structure in the Neolithic period than in the subsequent Bronze Age. The specific question of how the labor required to build Stonehenge was organized, and what social mechanisms were used to motivate and coordinate the effort, is one that the material evidence does not directly answer. The scale of the construction program, and the specific logistics of transporting, preparing, and erecting stones of the size and the weight of the sarsens, implies some form of centralized direction, but whether this direction was exercised by a hereditary elite, by religious specialists, by achieved status leaders, or by some form of collective decision-making process that left no material trace in the archaeological record is not determinable from the available evidence. The evidence from the animal bone deposits at Dowington Walls, which include remains of pigs and cattle from across a very wide area of Britain, speaks to large gatherings of people who came to the Stonehenge area from distant parts of the island, bringing their animals with them for feasting events associated with the construction and the use of the monuments. The specific geographic diversity of the people attending these gatherings, visible in the isotopic signatures of the animal bones, suggests that Stonehenge and its associated monuments served as a regional and perhaps national gathering place for the communities of prehistoric Britain, rather than simply as a local monument serving a local community. The specific character of the Neolithic period in Britain, the cultural and demographic context within which the earliest Stonehenge was built, has been transformed by the results of ancient DNA research in the past decade. The farming communities that first arrived in Britain from continental Europe around 4000 BCE, replacing or absorbing the earlier Mesolithic hunter-gatherer population, were the people who built the earliest monument phases of Stonehenge and who raised the long barrows and the causewayed enclosures of the Neolithic landscape. The specific character of the transition from the earlier Mesolithic hunter-gatherer population to the Neolithic farming communities is one that the ancient DNA evidence has clarified significantly. The scale of the population replacement, in which the earlier hunter-gatherer genetic heritage was largely replaced by the genetics of the incoming farming communities from Anatolia, is now established as a dramatic and rapid event, and the specific mechanisms of this transition are one of the more actively investigated questions in the prehistoric genetics of Britain. Replacing or absorbing the earlier Mesolithic hunter-gatherer population were the people who built the earliest monument phases of Stonehenge and who raised the long barrows and the causewayed enclosures of the Neolithic landscape. The ancient DNA results show that these early farmers were descended from populations that had migrated from Anatolia through the Danube corridor and then westward across Europe, and that they brought with them the specific combination of agricultural and pastoral practices, the specific material culture, and the specific funerary traditions that characterize the British Neolithic. The dramatic population replacement that occurred around 2400 to 2000 BCE, which the ancient DNA evidence documents with considerable precision, transformed the genetic composition of the British population in a way that has few parallels in the prehistoric record. Incoming communities related to the continental Bell Beaker culture, who were themselves descended in part from steppe populations that had expanded westward across Europe in the preceding centuries, arrived in Britain and within a few generations appear to have largely replaced the earlier Neolithic farming population. The mechanism of this replacement, whether it involved conflict, disease, competitive demographic expansion, or some combination of these factors, is not directly visible in the genetic evidence, but the demographic result is clear. The specific implications of this population replacement for the interpretation of Stonehenge are profound. The main phase of Stonehenge construction, with the erection of the Great Sarsen stones around 2500 BCE, occurred at approximately the same time as the arrival and expansion of the Bell Beaker communities, and the question of which community built which phase of the monument is one that the current research is actively investigating. The available evidence suggests that the initial planning and perhaps the beginning of the Sarsen construction was carried out by the earlier Neolithic population, but that the completion and subsequent modification of the stone monument occurred during or after the population replacement, and may therefore represent the work of the incoming Bell Beaker communities. The continuity of monument use across the demographic transition, and the specific ways in which the new population related to and modified the monuments of their predecessors, give a picture of a prehistoric landscape that was not simply cleared and rebuilt by incoming communities, but that was continuously inhabited and continuously modified by successive populations who found meaning and value in the monumental inheritance of their predecessors. The discovery of the Stonehenge builders' settlement at Dyington Walls, and the associated evidence for the specific character of the feasting and construction activities associated with the monument, is one of the more important contributions of recent archaeology to the understanding of the site. The Stonehenge Riverside Project, a major research program conducted in the early years of the 21st century by a consortium of British universities under the direction of Mike Parker Pearson, produced a series of important new discoveries about the prehistoric landscape around Stonehenge and about the specific character of the communities that built the monument. The specific methodological contributions of the Riverside Project, including the systematic sampling of faunal and floral remains from the Dyington Walls excavations and the development of the formal model of the Stonehenge Dyington Walls ritual landscape, have been influential in shaping subsequent research programs and in establishing a framework for interpreting the various components of the broader monument complex in relation to each other. By a consortium of British universities under the direction of Mike Parker Pearson, produced a series of important new discoveries about the prehistoric landscape around Stonehenge and about the specific character of the communities that built the monument. The excavation of the settlement associated with Dyington Walls, and the identification of a timber circle at the end of a short avenue leading from the settlement to the River Avon, gave a picture of the prehistoric ritual landscape that was considerably more complex than earlier research had revealed. The specific model proposed by Parker Pearson and his colleagues, based on the new evidence from the Riverside Project, treats Stonehenge and Dyington Walls as complementary monuments in a landscape of the living and the dead. In this interpretation, Dyington Walls, with its timber circle and its associated settlement and feasting evidence, was the domain of the living, a place where the communities that built and maintained Stonehenge gathered for the ceremonies associated with the construction work and with the festivals of the annual cycle. Stonehenge, with its stone circle and its cremation cemetery and its precise solar alignments, was the domain of the dead, a place where the ancestors were commemorated and where the ceremonies associated with death and burial were conducted. The specific evidence for feasting at Dyington Walls, in the form of the enormous quantities of pig and cattle bone recovered from the excavations, speaks to large gatherings of people who consumed food in quantities that far exceeded what any permanent settlement of the period would have generated. The feasting appears to have been associated with specific seasons of the year, and the specific combination of the faunal evidence with the solar alignments of the monuments suggests that the major gatherings coincided with the solstices, with the midwinter solstice at Stonehenge and the midsummer solstice at Dowington Walls potentially serving as the specific occasions for the most significant ritual events. The identification of a formal earthwork avenue leading from Dowington Walls to the River Avon, comparable in its spatial organization to the Stonehenge Avenue at the other end of the river, suggests that a formal processional route connected the two monuments by way of the river, with people moving from the timber circle of the living at Dowington Walls along the avenue to the river, along the river by boat or on foot, and then along the Stonehenge Avenue to the stone circle of the dead. The specific ritual significance of the river as a boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead is consistent with the broader interpretation of the landscape as a structured ritual geography. The investigation of Stonehenge and the surrounding landscape has been transformed in the past 2 decades by the application of new technologies that have revealed features invisible to conventional excavation and survey. The Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes Project, a major geophysical survey program conducted between 2010 and 2014 by a European consortium under the leadership of Vince Gaffney, applied a comprehensive suite of geophysical survey methods to the broader Stonehenge landscape, producing a detailed map of subsurface features across an area of 12 square kilometers. The specific methods used in the Hidden Landscapes Project, including ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, earth-resistance survey, and electromagnetic induction, each sensitive to different subsurface properties and therefore capable of detecting different categories of archaeological feature, were applied in a systematic grid across the survey area in a program of unprecedented scale and comprehensiveness. The results demonstrate the potential of large-scale geophysical survey to transform the understanding of complex prehistoric landscapes without the need for excavation. By a European consortium under the leadership of Vince Gaffney, applied a comprehensive suite of geophysical survey methods to the broader Stonehenge landscape, producing a detailed map of subsurface features across an area of 12 square kilometers. The results revealed more than 80 previously unknown monuments and features, including pits, ditches, and other earthwork features that extended the known complexity of the ancient landscape considerably beyond what the visible monuments and the previous excavations had revealed. Among the more significant discoveries of the Hidden Landscapes Project was the identification of a series of large pits arranged in a circle of approximately 5 kilometers in circumference on the margins of the Stonehenge landscape, a feature whose scale and whose specific arrangement suggest an intentional structure of considerable spatial extent. The interpretation of this large-scale feature, which has been named the Dowington Wall shafts, is still being worked out, but the specific scale of the construction implies an organized community effort comparable in ambition to the construction of the stone monument itself. The application of airborne laser scanning, LiDAR technology, to the Stonehenge landscape has produced detailed topographic maps that reveal subtle earthwork features invisible in conventional aerial photography, and the results have added significantly to the known inventory of prehistoric features in the broader landscape. The specific character of some of these features, including possible field systems and settlement traces, gives a picture of the prehistoric use of the landscape that goes beyond the monument record and documents the agricultural and domestic dimensions of life in the Stonehenge area alongside the ceremonial ones. The recent discovery of a major circular earthwork monument at Dowington, larger than Stonehenge itself, buried beneath the fields adjacent to Dowington Walls, was made using ground-penetrating radar as part of the Hidden Landscape Survey. This monument, which has been interpreted as a C-shaped or circular arrangement of large pits, represents a previously unknown major monument in the Stonehenge landscape and demonstrates the continuing potential of non-invasive survey methods to transform the understanding of the prehistoric ritual complex. The specific cosmological beliefs of the Stonehenge builders are not directly recoverable from the material evidence, but the specific character of the monument's design and the specific associations of the burial evidence allow some inferences to be made. The solar alignments of the monument connect its ritual program to the specific movements of the sun through the annual cycle, and the specific significance of the solstices in the ritual life of the communities that built the monument is one of the more securely established inferences from the available evidence. The specific way in which the monument was designed to make the solstitial alignments physically present and experientially vivid, through the specific spatial organization of the stones and the specific management of sightlines within the monument, speaks to a tradition of architectural design in which the astronomical orientation was not simply a background fact but a foreground experience. The monument was designed to be experienced as aligned, to make the alignment a physical fact of the visitor's presence within the stone circle rather than simply a geometric property of the plan. Through the annual cycle, and the specific significance of the solstices in the ritual life of the communities that built the monument is one of the more securely established inferences from the available evidence. The midwinter and midsummer solstices are the moments of maximum and minimum solar energy in the annual cycle, and their specific significance for agricultural communities whose food security depended on the predictable return of the sun's warmth after the winter darkness is easy to understand without any detailed knowledge of the specific beliefs of the monument builders. The connection between the solar alignments and the funerary use of the monument suggests a cosmological framework in which the movements of the sun were understood to have a specific relationship to the cycle of death and rebirth that the monument's creators apparently believed their dead to undergo. The specific orientation of the monument, with the sun rising over the monument at midsummer and setting through its primary axis at midwinter, would have given the monument's alignment a specific relevance to both the celebration of the sun's power at its maximum and to the ritual of the return of the sun's power from its minimum, the two moments that most directly represented the themes of vitality and renewal. The specific character of the monument's architecture, with its precisely fitted stone joints and its carefully maintained sightlines, speaks to a tradition of architectural knowledge and practice that was transmitted across generations of builders. The specific proportional relationships in the monument, which some researchers have argued encode specific geometrical principles, suggest a sophisticated understanding of spatial relationships that went beyond purely practical construction knowledge. Whether the specific spatial properties of the monument encoded specific cosmological meanings, in the way that many ancient religious architectures encode cosmological significance in their proportional systems, is a question that the research has addressed but not definitively resolved. The acoustic properties of Stonehenge, which have been investigated by researchers studying the specific sound environment within the stone circle, produce a distinctive resonance that is very different from the acoustic environment of the open plain outside the monument. The specific character of sound within the stone circle, including the specific way in which the stones reflect and concentrate sound, would have given ritual performance within the monument a distinctive sonic quality that contributed to the specific experiential character of ceremonies conducted there. Whether this acoustic quality was an intended feature of the monument's design or an unintended consequence of its construction is not determinable from the material evidence. The Avebury Monument Complex, located approximately 30 kilometers north of Stonehenge, is the other major prehistoric monument of the Wiltshire Chalk and gives an important comparative perspective on the tradition of which Stonehenge is part. Avebury is, in some respects, even more impressive than Stonehenge, though it has never achieved the same popular recognition. The Avebury Henge is one of the larger prehistoric stone circles in the world, with an outer circle approximately 330 meters in diameter containing two inner circles and a large central stone. The specific character of the Avebury Monument as an experience is very different from the experience of Stonehenge. Where Stonehenge is contained and geometrically precise, Avebury is vast and sprawling, its stone circle so large that a village now stands within it, its earthworks so massive that they can only be appreciated as a whole from an elevated position. The specific scale of Avebury and the specific intimacy of its relationship to the modern landscape, with houses and a church built within the ancient monument, give it a quality of layered historical presence that Stonehenge, surrounded by managed open land, does not have in the same way, though it has never achieved the same popular recognition. The Avebury Henge is one of the largest prehistoric stone circles in the world, with an outer circle approximately 330 meters in diameter containing 2 inner circles and a large central stone. The earthwork enclosure that surrounds the stone circles consists of a massive circular ditch with an outer bank, the ditch reaching a depth of approximately 10 meters in some sections and enclosing an area of approximately 11 hectares. The scale of the earthwork construction alone, requiring the excavation of hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of chalk using antler picks and bone shovels, represents a labor investment that rivals the stone construction of Stonehenge. The Avebury complex also includes the West Kennet Long Barrow, one of the best preserved Neolithic chambered tombs in Britain, and the Salisbury Hill, the largest prehistoric earthwork mound in Europe, an artificial chalk hill of uncertain purpose that rises approximately 38 meters above the surrounding plain. Together, these monuments give the Avebury area a density of major prehistoric monuments comparable to the Stonehenge area, and the specific relationships between these monuments in the broader prehistoric landscape of Wiltshire are one of the more productive areas of current research. The comparison between Avebury and Stonehenge illuminates both the common features of the Wiltshire Neolithic and Bronze Age monument tradition and the specific differences between individual monuments within that tradition. Both monuments use large standing stones within a circular earthwork enclosure, and both are aligned to specific astronomical events, though the specific astronomical orientations of Avebury are less precisely determined than those of Stonehenge. The specific differences in the form and the organization of the two monuments, and the specific evidence for different kinds of activity at each site, suggest that they served different but complementary functions within the broader ritual landscape of prehistoric Wiltshire. The discovery and the excavation of the quarries from which the Stonehenge stones were sourced has been one of the more productive areas of recent Stonehenge research. The identification of the specific quarry sites in the Preseli Hills in Wales from which the bluestones were extracted was achieved by the geochemical analysis of the bluestones themselves, which allowed their specific mineralogical and chemical composition to be matched to specific outcrops in the Preseli Hills landscape. The specific landscape of the Preseli Hills, with its dramatic outcrops of igneous rock rising above the moorland, is one of the more evocative prehistoric landscapes in Britain, and the investigation of the quarry sites in this landscape has given researchers a much more specific picture of the environment from which the bluestones were taken and the specific human choices that were made in their selection. The evidence for the significance of the Preseli Hills as a ceremonial landscape in its own right, before and independently of its connection to Stonehenge, is one of the more interesting recent contributions to the understanding of the monument's origins. From which the bluestones were extracted was achieved by the geochemical analysis of the bluestones themselves, which allowed their specific mineralogical and chemical composition to be matched to specific outcrops in the Preseli Hills landscape. The subsequent excavation of these outcrops by a team led by Mike Parker-Pearson has revealed evidence for the specific quarrying techniques used to extract the stones, including the specific wedging and splitting methods used to detach large blocks from the natural outcrops, and for the specific staging areas where the extracted blocks were prepared for transport. Crucially, the Preseli Hills quarry sites also show evidence for the construction of stone monuments in the Welsh landscape, predating the transport of the stones to Wiltshire. The identification of quarried stone sockets and the remains of a dismantled stone circle at one of the bluestone quarry sites has led researchers to propose that the bluestones were originally erected in a monument in Wales before being dismantled and transported to Stonehenge. If this interpretation is correct, it gives the bluestones a specific provenance that goes beyond their geological origin. They were not simply stones from a specific place, but stones that had already been part of a monument in another specific place, and the transport of these pre-used stones to Stonehenge would have carried a specific cultural significance related to their previous history. The identification of the Sarsen Quarry area at West Woods on the northern fringe of the Marlborough Downs, and the excavation of quarrying evidence at this location, has given researchers direct evidence for the specific methods used to extract and prepare the Sarsen stones. The specific evidence for the shaping of the Sarsen blocks at the quarry site, including the debris from the shaping process and the possible routes of the initial transport from the quarry, is adding to the picture of the construction process that the study of the monument itself has produced. The investigation of the quarry landscapes, both in Wales and on the Marlborough Downs, is connecting the story of Stonehenge to the specific geographic origins of its materials in ways that give the monument a broader territorial significance. The specific choice of materials from distant sources, when local alternatives were available, speaks to the cultural importance of those specific origins for the communities that built the monument. And the specific geographic reach of the monument's material connections is one of the ways in which Stonehenge can be understood as a monument that expressed the territorial and social connections of its builders across a very large area. What makes Stonehenge different from other prehistoric monuments is the specific combination of its longevity, its precision, and the specific investment of labor that its construction required. Stonehenge was not built once. It was built and rebuilt and modified across approximately 1,500 years, with each successive community that used the site finding ways to add to, modify, or reinterpret the monument inherited from its predecessors. This longevity speaks to the specific cultural persistence of the site's significance, which was maintained across multiple periods of cultural change, including the major demographic replacement of around 2400 to 2000 BCE, in a way that very few ancient monuments can match. The precision of the monument's construction is another distinguishing feature. The specific accuracy of the solar alignments, the specific proportional relationships of the stone arrangements, and the specific quality of the stoneworking that dressed the sarsen blocks and fitted the mortise and tenon joints that hold the lintels in place, all speak to a tradition of constructional knowledge and spatial reasoning that was not achieved by accident. The monument's builders were not simply piling up large stones. They were making precise spatial decisions, using specific measurement systems and specific construction techniques, in pursuit of a specific design intent. The specific investment of labor required by the construction is the feature that most directly speaks to the social organization and the cultural priorities of the monument builders. The estimates for the total labor investment in the main sarsen construction phase alone range from hundreds of thousands to millions of person-hours, depending on the specific assumptions made about the efficiency of the transportation and construction methods used. Whatever the specific number, the investment required was clearly enormous by any standard of the period, and the willingness of the communities of prehistoric Britain to invest this labor in a single ceremonial monument speaks to the specific priority that the monument and what it represented held in their cultural life. The specific combination of longevity, precision, and labor investment gives Stonehenge a character that distinguishes it from most prehistoric monuments in Britain and elsewhere, and it is this combination that makes the monument the object of sustained scholarly attention and of persistent popular fascination. The stone circle on Salisbury Plain is not simply a large ancient construction. It is evidence for the specific priorities and the specific organizational capacity of a series of communities whose cultural life we can only partially reconstruct from the material they left behind. The specific longevity of Stonehenge as a significant site, maintained across 1,500 years of construction and modification and through a major population replacement, speaks to the specific power of the monument to attract and retain the investment of successive communities in ways that most monuments, however impressive at their moment of creation, are not able to sustain. The specific reasons for this exceptional longevity are one of the more interesting questions in the scholarship, and the answers that the evidence allows are partial but suggestive of a site whose specific combination of astronomical precision and funerary association gave it a significance that outlasted the specific communities that created each of its phases. The specific social and cultural changes that accompanied the population replacement of the Bell Beaker period, and their relationship to the development and modification of Stonehenge, are among the more fascinating questions in current prehistoric research. The Bell Beaker phenomenon is one of the more complex cultural and demographic events in European prehistory. Named after the distinctive bell-shaped ceramic vessels that are among the most characteristic material markers of the tradition, the bell beaker culture spread across a very wide area of Western and Central Europe between approximately 2800 and 1800 BCE. The specific character of the bell beaker ceramic tradition, with its specific decoration techniques and its specific vessel forms, is one of the more widely distributed material culture complexes in prehistoric Europe and the specific mechanisms of its diffusion, ranging from the actual movement of people to the adoption of specific material culture by existing populations through trade and social emulation, varied significantly in different regions. Britain represents one of the more extreme cases of actual population movement rather than simply cultural adoption. Named after the distinctive bell-shaped ceramic vessels that are among the most characteristic material markers of the tradition, the bell beaker culture spread across a very wide area of Western and Central Europe between approximately 2800 and 1800 BCE, in a combination of cultural diffusion and actual population movement that varied in its specific character in different regions. In Britain, the genetic evidence shows that the bell beaker expansion was accompanied by a major and rapid population replacement, in contrast to some continental regions where the spread of bell beaker material culture occurred without comparable demographic change. The specific cultural contributions that the bell beaker communities brought to Britain are visible in the material record of the period. The introduction of copper and gold metalworking, the specific ceramic tradition of the beaker vessels, and the specific burial tradition of individual inhumation in a crouched position under a round barrow all represent changes from the preceding Neolithic cultural tradition. The specific degree of cultural continuity or discontinuity across the demographic transition, and the specific ways in which the incoming bell beaker communities related to the monumental landscape of their predecessors, are questions that the evidence addresses in interesting and incomplete ways. The specific evidence for the continuation of Stonehenge as a significant site through and after the bell beaker period is important for understanding the cultural dynamics of the transition. The monument was not abandoned when the earlier Neolithic population was replaced. It continued to be used, and the later phases of bluestone rearrangement within the monument may represent the specific ways in which the new population claimed and reinterpreted the inherited monument. The round barrows of the early Bronze Age, clustered in cemeteries visible from Stonehenge, are the monuments of the bell beaker and early Bronze Age communities, and their specific spatial relationship to the earlier monument speaks to a cultural landscape in which the older monument continued to be a significant point of orientation for the new inhabitants of the region. The specific individual known as the Amesbury Archer, found in a rich burial near Amesbury approximately 5 kilometers from Stonehenge, is one of the more famous individuals from the bell beaker period in Britain. His burial, which is among the richest of the period so far discovered, contained a remarkable assemblage of grave goods including copper knives, gold hair ornaments, arrowheads, and beaker vessels, and his isotopic signature shows that he grew up in the Alpine region of Central Europe rather than in Britain. The Amesbury Archer is direct physical evidence for the movement of people from continental Europe to Britain in the bell beaker period, and his burial near Stonehenge in the period of the monument's most ambitious construction phase connects the story of individual human mobility to the story of the monument's construction in a specific and affecting way. The long aftermath of Stonehenge, the centuries and millennia during which the monument remained a presence in the landscape of southern Britain after the active period of its use ended, gives a picture of how a prehistoric monument can persist in human consciousness across radically different cultural contexts. The Bronze Age communities that built the round barrow cemeteries around Stonehenge in the period between approximately 2000–1500 BCE were the last communities to actively use the monument in the specific way that the evidence suggests it was used in its primary period, for funerary ceremonies and large-scale gatherings. The specific landscape of round barrows visible from Stonehenge, the cemeteries of the Bush Barrow group to the southwest, and the various other barrow clusters that punctuate the plain, give the monument a specific funerary setting that connects it to the long tradition of memorial and commemorative use that had characterized the site from its earliest phases. The specific individuals buried in the richest of the round barrows, including the individual known as the Bush Barrow chieftain, whose grave goods include a gold lozenge and a bronze dagger of exceptional quality, are the specific people of the early Bronze Age whose lives and deaths define the final active phase of the monument's primary history. In the period between approximately 2000–1500 BCE were the last communities to actively use the monument in the specific way that the evidence suggests it was used in its primary period, for funerary ceremonies and large-scale gatherings. After the Bronze Age, the monument remains standing, but the specific evidence for active ritual use becomes much more sparse, and Stonehenge appears to have entered a long period of reduced use and of gradual integration into the changing cultural landscape of Iron Age and then Roman Britain. The Romans who built their road system across Britain in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE knew Stonehenge and found it remarkable. The specific evidence for Roman period activity at the site, including the discovery of Roman coins and pottery in the Stonehenge area, speaks to a continuing interest in the monument among the Roman period inhabitants of southern Britain, and the specific character of this interest, whether it was primarily antiquarian curiosity, religious veneration, or something else entirely, is reflected in the specific Roman period finds from the site. The medieval period brought a specific cultural framework to the interpretation of Stonehenge that was very different from any that the monument builders would have recognized. The association of the monument with the wizard Merlin and the Arthurian tradition, documented in the 12th century history of the Kings of Britain by Geoffrey of Monmouth, gave Stonehenge a place in the medieval narrative of British history that connected it to the legendary founding of the nation in a way that obscured its actual prehistoric origins. The specific persistence of this legendary association, which remained current in popular culture well into the early modern period, is itself evidence for the specific power that the monument exercised on the imaginations of the successive communities that encountered it across the centuries. The modern history of Stonehenge, from the first systematic studies of the monument in the 17th century through the development of professional archaeology in the 19th and 20th centuries to the contemporary management of the site as a World Heritage Site, is a story of successive interpretive frameworks, each shaped by the specific intellectual culture of its period, and each contributing to the cumulative understanding that the contemporary scholarship has assembled. What modern archaeology and science have established about Stonehenge in the past several decades has substantially revised the understanding of the monument and of the communities that built it. The development of precise radiocarbon dating, and particularly the application of Bayesian statistical methods to multiple radiocarbon dates from the same context, has transformed the understanding of the specific chronology of Stonehenge's construction. The specific intellectual achievement of Bayesian chronological modeling, which uses statistical methods to combine the radiocarbon dates with the stratigraphic and contextual evidence to produce precise date estimates for specific events, is one of the more significant methodological contributions of the past generation of prehistoric archaeology to the understanding of monument chronologies. The application of these methods to the Stonehenge radiocarbon corpus has produced a considerably more precise and more reliable account of the monument's construction sequence than the earlier reliance on individual radiocarbon dates could achieve. To multiple radiocarbon dates from the same context has transformed the understanding of the specific chronology of Stonehenge's construction. Where earlier work could establish only approximate dates for the major building phases, the application of Bayesian modeling to the growing corpus of radiocarbon dates is now producing construction date ranges of a precision that allows the specific sequence of events to be established within a few decades in some cases. The specific results of this dating work have refined the chronological framework of the monument's development and have enabled the correlation of specific construction phases with specific events in the broader cultural history of prehistoric Britain. The ancient DNA revolution in prehistoric archaeology, which has produced genome-wide data from dozens of individuals associated with the Stonehenge landscape, has given researchers a new dimension of evidence for the biological history of the monument builders. The specific population genetic results, including the evidence for the major demographic replacement of around 2400 to 2000 BCE, have transformed the understanding of the relationship between the different phases of the monument's construction and the different communities of its builders, and have given the abstract archaeological phases of the monument's history a specific biological dimension that connects them to the actual people who carried out the construction. The geophysical survey programs of the past 2 decades, particularly the Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes project, have dramatically expanded the known inventory of prehistoric monuments in the broader Stonehenge landscape and have given researchers a much more complete picture of the spatial organization of the ancient ritual complex. The specific new monuments and features identified by the geophysical surveys, including the large circular pit monument at Doington and the various earthwork features revealed by the LiDAR survey, are adding new complexity and new depth to the understanding of the prehistoric landscape that Stonehenge was built within. The combination of these new methodological approaches, applied to an ongoing program of targeted excavation and environmental analysis, is producing a picture of Stonehenge and its builders that is considerably richer and more specific than the picture available to any previous generation of researchers. The questions that remain open are still many, but the quality and the precision of the evidence that is available to address them is greater than at any previous point in the history of the scholarship. What remains uncertain about Stonehenge encompasses some of the most fundamental questions about the monument's purpose and the specific beliefs of its builders. The specific theological content of the beliefs that motivated the construction of Stonehenge is not recoverable from the material evidence. The solar alignments speak to an astronomical orientation that was clearly important to the builders, and the funerary associations of the monument speak to a connection between the monument and the ritual life of death and the dead. The specific question of whether the builders of Stonehenge understood the solar alignments as sacred in a specifically religious sense, or as practical in a more calendrical sense, or as both simultaneously, is one that the evidence cannot resolve. The distinction between the sacred and the practical may itself be a modern conceptual imposition on a tradition that did not make the same distinction, and the specific cosmological framework of the monument builders may have integrated what modern minds would separate into a unified understanding of the relationship between the human world and the astronomical cycles that governed it. Is not recoverable from the material evidence. But the specific cosmological framework within which these elements were meaningful, the specific stories and the specific beliefs about the sun and the dead and the relationship between them that the monument was designed to express, are not accessible from the physical evidence alone. The specific political and social mechanisms through which the construction of Stonehenge was organized and funded are another area of genuine uncertainty. The scale of the labor investment implies some form of organized coordination, but the specific form of that coordination, whether it was based on the authority of hereditary leaders, on the persuasive power of religious specialists, on the reciprocal obligations of kinship networks, or on some other social mechanism, is not visible in the material record. The specific social organization of the Neolithic and early Bronze Age communities of Britain remains one of the more actively debated questions in prehistoric archaeology. The specific relationship between the astronomical alignments and the funerary use of the monument, and the specific way in which these two dimensions of the monument's program were integrated in the beliefs and the practices of the monument builders, is an area where the evidence raises interesting possibilities without providing definitive answers. The hypothesis that the monument connected the dead to the movements of the sun, perhaps through a belief in a solar afterlife or a solar rebirth, is consistent with the alignment evidence and with the funerary associations, but the specific theological content of any such belief is not recoverable. The interpretation of the acoustic properties of the monument, and the specific role of sound and music in the ritual activities conducted within the stone circle, is an area where the research is producing interesting results that have not yet been fully integrated into the mainstream interpretations of the monument. The specific character of the sound environment within the stone circle, and the specific implications of that character for the ritual practices that the monument was designed to host, are questions that the archaeological and acoustic research is continuing to investigate. Stonehenge changes how we think about the organizational capacity and the cultural ambitions of prehistoric communities, and about the specific relationship between monumental architecture and the societies that produce it. The most immediate implication is about the scale of what prehistoric communities were capable of achieving without the specific technologies that conventional accounts of social complexity treat as prerequisites. Stonehenge was built without writing, without metal tools, without wheeled vehicles, and without the institutional structures of a state. The specific lesson of Stonehenge for the broader understanding of human organizational capacity is that the standard technological prerequisites for large-scale collective action are prerequisites in specific historical contexts, not universal requirements. The communities of Neolithic Britain solved the problems of large-scale coordination through social mechanisms, through specific traditions of mutual obligation and community identity, that did not require the specific institutional structures of literacy and state organization. The specific form of those social mechanisms is not visible in the material record, but their effectiveness is documented in the monument they produced. Without the specific technologies that conventional accounts of social complexity treat as prerequisites, its builders organized the transport of stones weighing 25 tons across distances of hundreds of kilometers, maintained a construction program across 1,500 years, and produced a monument of mathematical precision that has persisted for 5,000 years. The specific organizational capacity required to achieve this was real and substantial, and it demands a serious account of how pre-state communities can coordinate large-scale collective action. The broader implication is about the specific priority that the communities of Neolithic and early Bronze Age Britain placed on the creation and maintenance of ceremonial monuments at the expense of other possible investments of their labor. The specific choice to invest enormous quantities of human effort in a stone circle rather than in improved agricultural infrastructure, defensive works, or other productive investments speaks to a cultural tradition that valued the specific functions of the monument, the commemoration of the dead, the alignment of the community with the astronomical cycles, the creation of a shared ceremonial space, above other possible uses of collective labor. The specific lesson of Stonehenge for the broader understanding of human cultural motivation is about the range of things that human communities will invest their scarce resources in when their basic needs are met. The monument builders were not in the grip of some irrational compulsion. They were making deliberate cultural choices about what was worth the investment of their time and effort, and the specific choices they made, across 1,500 years of successive communities, were choices in favor of a specific kind of monumental ceremonial architecture that served specific social and spiritual functions that the communities valued highly. The stones are still standing on the plain as they have stood for 5,000 years, and the specific investment of effort and intelligence that produced them is still visible in the precision of the alignments and the quality of the stoneworking and the specific spatial organization of the monument. The people who built it are gone, their names unknown, their specific beliefs inaccessible. But the work of their hands and the evidence of their specific cultural priorities is still there, in the stone, on the plain, in the morning light of the midsummer solstice. The people who built Stonehenge were fully human in every sense, and the specific evidence that the archaeology and the bioarchaeology have produced gives access to their humanity in ways that the monument alone cannot provide. The individual buried at Stonehenge whose cremated remains show an isotopic signature consistent with origin in the Preseli Hills region of Wales is one of the more affecting specific individuals in the Stonehenge record. This person, who lived in the period around 3000 BCE, apparently came from the same region where the bluestones originated, and was buried in the monument in a period that predates the transport of those stones to Wiltshire. The specific connection between this individual and the landscape from which the monument's most carefully selected stones were later brought, and the specific uncertainty about whether that connection was coincidental or significant, is one of the more humanly immediate questions that the bioarchaeological evidence raises. The Amesbury archer, whose grave goods include some of the earliest copper objects in Britain and whose isotopic signature places his childhood in the Alpine region of continental Europe, is a specific individual whose life story, partially reconstructible from the evidence of his bones and his grave goods, connects the abstract cultural phenomenon of the Bell Beaker expansion to the experience of a specific person. He traveled from Central Europe to the edge of the Atlantic world, and he died and was buried within sight of the monument that was being constructed in the same period, and the specific richness of his burial speaks to a person of considerable status in the community that buried him. The people who came to the feasting events at Dowington Walls, traveling from distant parts of Britain to participate in the large communal gatherings associated with the construction of the monument, left the specific evidence of their participation in the enormous assemblage of animal bone and pottery and flint tools that the excavations have recovered. The specific evidence for the specific animals they ate and the specific pottery they used connects the abstract demographic and cultural history of prehistoric Britain to the specific experience of people who made specific journeys for specific purposes and whose participation in the communal life of the monument building left specific physical traces in the archaeological record. The stonemasons who shaped the sarsen stones, working the extremely hard silicified sandstone with stone mauls and antler picks in a process that required enormous patience and specific technical knowledge, were exercising specific craft skills of a high order in the service of a specific cultural project. The specific quality of the finished stone surfaces and the specific precision of the mortise and tenon joints that locked the lintel stones in place speak to workers who cared about the quality of their work and who had the knowledge and the skill to achieve it. The specific community of people that gathered at Dowington Walls for the feasting events associated with the construction of the monument included individuals who had traveled from distant parts of Britain, from Wales and from Scotland and from the far south and east of England. The specific geographic diversity of the people who participated in the construction gatherings, visible in the isotopic signatures of the animal bones from the Dowington Walls feasting deposits, gives a picture of the monument as a project of the whole of prehistoric Britain rather than simply of the local communities of Salisbury Plain. The specific people who came to Stonehenge from the ends of the island, for whatever combination of obligation, devotion, and community identity drew them, were fully human in their specific motivations and their specific experience of a journey and a gathering and a shared work that the monument preserves in stone. The central image of Stonehenge is the image of the monument on the morning of the winter solstice, the stones standing in the frost before the sun rises over the plain. The specific quality of Salisbury Plain in the winter is cold and exposed and very clear. The chalk surface of the plain holds the cold of the night into the morning, and the monument stands in the frost in the pre-dawn dark with the specific solidity of 5,000-year-old stone. Then the sun begins to rise to the northeast, and the light comes across the plain in the horizontal planes of a low winter sun, and the shadows of the stones fall long and blue across the white surface of the frost, and the specific spatial logic of the monument, the alignment of the stones to this specific astronomical event, becomes physically present in the landscape in a way that the photographs and the descriptions never quite capture. The people who built this monument knew this morning. They designed the primary axis of the monument to be aligned to this specific event, to this specific quality of light coming from this specific direction, and the alignment has been maintained through 5,000 years of wind and rain and the slow shift of the stone positions as the earth under them settles and moves. The specific precision of the alignment, still accurate to within a few degrees of the true solstitial direction, is itself evidence for the care and the astronomical knowledge that went into the original design. The monument is a statement about the specific relationship between the human community and the astronomical cycles, made in stone by communities who had no writing and no surviving oral tradition, and whose beliefs are therefore accessible only through the specific geometry of what they built. The geometry says, "We knew where the sun rose and set at the extreme points of its cycle. We knew that those extreme points mattered, that the return of the sun from its minimum was a moment of significance that deserved to be marked in a way that would persist longer than any individual memory or any oral tradition. We built something that would still be marking that moment after we were gone. The sun is still rising in the same place on the morning of the winter solstice. The stones are still standing in the alignment that the monument builders designed. And the specific human desire to mark the return of the sun, to make the returning light visible and present in the structured space of a ceremonial monument, is a desire that the evidence of 5,000 years ago makes specific and vivid and genuinely affecting. The specific quality of the light on the stones at the winter solstice, the horizontal rays of the low sun entering the monument along its primary axis, makes a geometry that the builders designed 5,000 years ago still visible in the present. The specific alignment is not an accident or an approximation. It was planned by people who had watched the sun carefully enough to know exactly where it would appear on the horizon on the shortest day, and who built a monument that has been making that specific fact of the sky visible on that specific morning for 5,000 years of intervening human history. The ongoing management of Stonehenge as a World Heritage Site, and the ongoing research that continues to expand the understanding of the monument and its landscape, represent a sustained institutional commitment to the recovery and the presentation of one of the world's most significant prehistoric monuments. The management of Stonehenge has been a subject of controversy and active development for several decades, reflecting the specific tensions between the needs of archaeological preservation, public access, and the interests of various community groups who have claimed a specific relationship to the monument. The management of solstice access, which allows large numbers of visitors to enter the monument itself on the mornings of the summer and winter solstices, is one of the more visible expressions of the ongoing negotiation between the different interests in the site. The visitor center and landscape improvements at Stonehenge, completed in 2013, represented a major investment in the presentation of the site to the public that significantly improved the visitor experience and reduced the impact of visitor traffic on the ancient monument. The closure of the main road that previously ran within meters of the stones, and the construction of the new visitor center approximately 2 kilometers from the monument itself, have allowed a restoration of something closer to the prehistoric landscape setting of the monument and have improved the conservation of the ancient fabric. The research programs associated with the World Heritage Site, including the various university-based excavation and survey projects that have operated in the landscape over the past 2 decades, represent a sustained scientific investigation of the prehistoric complex that is producing new knowledge at a steady pace. The specific contributions of these programs, including the Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes Project, the Stonehenge Riverside Project, and the various quarry investigations in Wales and Wiltshire, have collectively transformed the understanding of the monument and its landscape in ways that were not anticipated at the beginning of the 21st century. The future of Stonehenge research will be shaped by the continuing development of new scientific methods, including increasingly precise dating, the expansion of the ancient DNA database for prehistoric Britain, and the development of new geophysical and remote sensing methods for the investigation of the buried landscape. Each new methodological advance is likely to produce new evidence that refines or revises current interpretations, and the specific picture of Stonehenge and its builders that emerges from this continuing research is one that will continue to develop as long as the monument stands and the scholarship endures. The specific future of Stonehenge itself, as a physical structure, is one that the conservation management of the World Heritage Site is working to secure across the challenges of weather, visitor impact, and the slow processes of geological change that affect all ancient stone monuments. The specific interventions required to maintain the physical fabric of the monument while preserving its archaeological integrity and its experiential character are ones that the management authority navigates with considerable care, and the record of the past 2 decades of conservation work at the site is one of genuine progress in the protection of an irreplaceable ancient monument. The plain is quiet before the sun comes up. Salisbury Plain in the early morning, in any season, has a specific quality of stillness that the openness of the landscape and the absence of the human activity of the day gives it. The chalk surface holds the dew, and the monument stands in the wet grass with the specific presence of very old stone, patient and unchanged through 5,000 years of the specific weather of the English upland, the summer thunderstorms and the winter frosts and the long gray rains of the seasons between. The builders of this monument are gone in a way that is more absolute than the absence of most historical people. Most of the historical individuals whose actions shaped the world left some trace in writing, their names or their words recorded in a medium designed to transmit them across time. The builders of Stonehenge left no names, no words, no texts. They left the stone and the bones of their dead and the specific geometry of the astronomical alignments, and these things speak in a language that the scholarship has been learning to read for 2 centuries without yet arriving at a complete translation. What the stone says is limited but specific. It says, "We knew where the sun rose and set at the turning points of its year." It says, "We understood that the dead required specific monuments and specific ceremonies in specific places." It says, "We were capable of moving very large things very long distances for purposes that we considered important." It says, "We could maintain a commitment to a specific site and a specific ceremonial tradition across 1,500 years of cultural change, through demographic replacement and through all the specific changes of the millennia." What the stone does not say is who we were, or what we believed in any specific sense, or what we called ourselves, or what stories we told about the sky and the dead and the specific moment when the sun begins to return. That silence is the most important fact about the monument. It is built from stone and from the absence of the language that would make the stone intelligible in a different way, and the combination of the specific physical presence of the monument and the specific cultural absence of its builders gives Stonehenge the distinctive quality of the ancient world at its most remote and its most eloquent. The specific experience of being at Stonehenge in the early morning, before the visitors arrive and before the day's noise and movement disturbs the quiet of the plain, is an experience of the ancient world in a form that the monument uniquely makes available. The stones are there. The alignment is there. The quality of the light entering the monument from the northeast, along the axis that the builders designed, is there. And in that specific combination of the physical presence of the ancient construction and the continuing astronomical event that the construction was designed to mark, something of the specific intent of the builders becomes momentarily and partially accessible across 5,000 years of distance and silence. If this documentary kept you company through the night, there is more waiting for you. Choose the next film on screen, and let the story keep unfolding.